my god, this video is going to be actually so long. I pray for my camera battery. I only have one on this camera. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Lindy Jung. I am a science fiction and fantasy writer. My debut novel is coming fall 2026 from Bloomsbury. It's adult fantasy. This channel is basically a space where I talk about writing and now publishing and my various experiences over the past 7, 10, 15 years, however you want to calculate it, in both of those areas. So a little while back, I posted this video where I actually shared the query letter that helped me get an agent in July of 2024. I want to say. Querying is basically the process through which you solicit agents, literary agents, in order to secure their representation, after which you can then go on and submit your manuscript or manuscripts to publishers in hopes that you'll get published. In that video, I also talked about querying packages as a whole, so usually you'll have a query letter, a synopsis, and maybe the first 10, 15, 50 pages of your novel, and you'll share that with an agent and hope that they like it enough to represent you. But one of the things that I've noticed in my many years on the internet and my many years as someone who has queried at different stages is that you're more likely to find a full, complete, successful query letter on the internet than you are to find an example of a full, complete, successful synopsis. Successful meaning that the author used those materials to help themselves get an agent. So by the nature of YouTube, the title of this video probably spoiled it already. We are going to be talking about synopses, which are an important part of the querying package. A synopsis, in brief, is going to be a 1 to 2 page summary of the events of your novel. It sounds simple, and it kind of is, but it also kind of isn't. We'll get into it. There's just a lot of conventions that I think are difficult to understand if you don't have an example in front of you. But also I wanted to talk about this because synopsis writing, in my opinion, is arguably a more important skill to develop for an aspiring career author than query letter writing. Ideally, you will only have to write a query letter maybe a couple times in your career. Once you hit that stage where you have representation, hopefully good representation, and you're at the point where you're submitting to publishers, you're probably not going to have to write a query letter again, but you are going to have to write more synopses. And that's because synopses actually get shared with editors during the submission phase of publication. Once you have your agent, you go on submission to editors. If an editor likes your book, in that process, they buy it and publish it. But that happens with, from my understanding, pretty much every book. There's some weird gray areas with proposals and stuff like that, but generally speaking, having the ability to write a solid synopsis for your books is a good skill to have in your back pocket if you're interested in this whole traditional publishing thing. But again, writing a synopsis is kind of this weird, opaque superpower. There's a lot of weird little rules. It's very difficult to find a fully fledged, proper example that worked online, and that's because synopses will spoil the entire book. So I feel in general, writers are probably less inclined to share something that spoils their entire plot of the book they hope to sell. And personally, I would love to share the synopsis of MOTHSBLOOD, but it's not a published book yet, and I'm pretty sure that if I did that, everyone would be mad at me. So I'm not going to be sharing the synopsis of MOTHSBLOOD today. Luckily for us, I have queried twice successfully, and I have been on submission with 3 books, including my debut. 2 of those books died on submission, and one of those books is one that I pretty much have no intention of ever revisiting again. So, the synopsis I'm about to share got me an agent in 2018. We're going to be calling this book ARI'S Guide. That's a shortened version of the full title. It was a young adult contemporary fantasy. I queried it at around 50,000 words, I think less than that, and got an agent. Had to add 30,000 words to it. I've talked about the story a bunch of times. It was a roller coaster. And ultimately, after 2.5 years on submission, which was poorly timed because COVID did hit a couple months into the first round, we declared it dead. I moved on to another young adult fantasy project. It's dead. So this is a synopsis from 2018. This is the one that I sent to agents. This is the one that I did send to the agent that I signed with. It's also a synopsis that, at least as part of the querying package, got me somewhere in the vein of 14 full requests. It was a double-digit number. Part of that is because I participated in DVPit, so big disclaimer there. DVPit was a diverse voices pitch contest on Twitter back in the day. I got a ton of those requests through that, but they did see this package, this querying package, before they requested the book, so hopefully the synopsis was enough to entice them. That being said, I don't think this is the best synopsis ever by any means. I'm kind of nervous to share it with you guys because 1, the story is so different from the types of things that I'm writing now. 2, this wasn't a fully developed novel at the time that I queried it. It was too short. There were a lot of weird janky elements. I'd been basically stewing the idea for too long, and it got really convoluted, but we're here for transparency, and at the end of the day, I want you guys to pay attention to the overall structure and style of the synopsis, rather than the contents of the story it's trying to convey. Oh, I guess the other thing I want to mention is that this synopsis also was pretty untouched. It didn't get touched up too much by my agent before we sent it out to publishers. I would say that generally speaking, I'm much better now at writing synopses than I was when I wrote this one, but I would say that synopsis writing is something that I am pretty good at. I usually write a synopsis as kind of like a mini outline before I fully outline and write a book even, so at kind of the idea brainstorming stage is when I write these, and I really like that as part of my process. I've gotten so used to the conventions in the style that I kind of just knock them out in a day usually. And as a result, because I feel pretty confident honestly in my synopsis writing skills, I am going to populate this read through of my synopsis with commentary. So just to give you an idea of what my intentions were, what the conventions of a synopsis are, and just basically an analysis of the synopsis and why it works, also why it doesn't. We'll see how it goes. And overall, I guess I just want to make it known that I've improved a ton as a writer. I've also switched directions a lot as a writer in the 7 years since I wrote the synopsis and since I wrote ARI'S Guide. But I've actually also improved a lot as a marketer. Like, I think I've gotten so much better at marketing my books and approaching my stories from a marketing standpoint. I think that is an important part of how you approach writing a synopsis. In a lot of ways, these are skills that I've picked up from listening to my indie author friends, learning more about the process of being an indie author because there's so much marketing that goes into that process, and I always found that really intimidating. And that actually brings us to today's sponsor, Lead Pages. Lead Pages streamlines the entire marketing process from ideation to execution. They ensure that every interaction counts, every campaign delivers, and every marketer has the data to back up their success. As we all know, as aspiring authors and writers, marketing matters. Using Lead Pages, I was able to build this beautiful custom landing page. I didn't have to do any coding, which is excellent because I don't know anything about coding. But Lead Pages is so much more than just a landing page creator. It's also a genuinely powerful marketing tool that allows you to utilize pop-ups and track your leads. It actually also even has its own website and blog building tool, so you can build your website or blog through Lead Pages as well, and it's very intuitive. Lead Pages and its powerful multifunctionality make it a wonderful tool for small businesses and teams, as well as individual creatives like indie authors. So whether you are an indie author or another type of independent creative or a small business owner or any of the above, Lead Pages is the high-performance marketing tool that you need to start powerfully converting your leads today. You can try your first 14 days of Lead Pages for free using my custom link, tryleadpages.co/lynndjung, which will also be included in the description box below. And thank you again to Lead Pages for sponsoring this video. Okay, so now we're gonna dive into it, but before we do, I do want to give my usual disclaimer. I am not an expert. Prescriptivist writing advice is for the birds. I'm just one voice in the void, showing you an example of a synopsis that worked for me. And if something different has worked for you, or something different works for your book, that is totally okay. This is not one size fits all, even for something as kind of typically structured as a synopsis tends to be. Different things can work for different stories and different authors. So I'm just gonna go right into the synopsis here, no bells and whistles, no frills. We are going to go through paragraph by paragraph and then discuss. And again, this is an old book. I don't write stuff like this anymore. It's just an example. So I don't need any like criticism or notes on the story. It's also like a tender subject because I worked on this for like 15 years and it was very much a story that grew up with me, so this is a vulnerable moment, okay? Plucky Korean-American teen Ariel Ari Kim is a waitress working at her family restaurant in the small town of Sunset Sands. She and her childhood friend, Finn Olsen, are closing up one night when someone breaks in and attacks them. So here we're introducing the main character, one of the more important secondary characters, and her initial situation super quickly. It's like one line. She works at her family restaurant, her name, the town's name, including the fact that she's a teenager and she's Korean American as well. That's kind of all the background knowledge you need for Ari, and then we get right into what she's happening the moment before the inciting incident. So the inciting incident is the part that kicks off the story, the part that kicks off the conflict. Here, it's a break-in at her restaurant. Her family restaurant, I should say. Even if there is a little bit of a longer lead up to the inciting incident in your book itself, in the synopsis you want to get kind of right into it, especially if you're writing like a secondary world fantasy that has a lot of setup, that does do a lot of world building for this background knowledge. You want to skim over everything except for the most critically important parts. One of the big pitfalls I see in like fantasy, sci-fi synopsis writing is that there's way too much time and attention given to that setup. You want to focus on those external plot beats as much as you possibly can. So that first setup paragraph is short and sweet and pretty minimal. In general, a lot of a synopsis is going to be pretty minimal. Their assailant is a sword-wielding boy named Alec who can disappear in the blink of an eye and summon ice, and he's been hired to kidnap Ari. His presence awakens an ancient, dormant magic within her, and when Alec threatens Finn, Ari unleashes a wave of fire to save her friend. She obliterates the restaurant in the process, and Finn dies in the blaze, leaving her grief-stricken and alone. So this is still the inciting incident. I kind of expanded upon it because it is important to show the main conflict, which is between Alec and Ari. He's the antagonist, but not the villain. I feel like that's important to say. And also the main motivating factor for Ari. She killed her friend. She's guilty. That is kind of her main internal struggle throughout the course of the book, so that's why this particular beat gets a little bit of extra attention here. Grief is kind of the main theme of the story, especially the grief of losing someone extremely young, and it is a pivotal part of Ari's narrative, so that's again why this was a little bit longer. And yeah, it's okay to not just skim over every plot point. If there is a beat that is particularly important, you can dedicate a paragraph to it. Just try to keep it as succinct as possible. You can tell that there's not a lot of like voice in this. I'm just saying straight up, Finn dies, Ari is grief-stricken and alone. You don't want to get flowery with anything. You don't want to dive too deep into maybe how she's punishing herself, how she's feeling. You just want to lay it out there, plain and simple. Next paragraph. At Finn's funeral, Ari meets Ryan, Finn's estranged uncle and a deadbeat sorcerer who quickly realizes Ari is responsible for the fire. Ryan informs Ari that she is an elemental, a human with rare magic running through her veins. After the funeral, Finn's grieving mother begs them to track down the 3 magical items she needs in order to make a deal with the mysterious Demon King and raise her son from the dead: a revenant flower, phoenix bones, and a hellfire blade. This is the call to action, so Ari is feeling these feelings, she's kind of in the muck, and she is given a way out, basically. She's given a quest that she can't turn away from, even though she probably should. This book has a very straightforward setup. It's young adult contemporary fantasy. It's, I think, very much like a pure YA in that it has some crossover appeal, but my target audience was teenagers. And so it's a quest. It has 3 MacGuffins. There's a demon king who's a big bad. I would say that in this section, it's fine. This is still setup, and I think I would trim this, because I named the 3 items that she goes to find, so the Revenant Flower, Phoenix Bones, and a Hellfire Blade. But do I need to name those, or do I have to say she just needs 3 ingredients? Also, I feel like the other thing that I should mention here is that Finn's mom is a witch, so she has magic and she's capable of doing like necromancy, basically. This is also very weird because in a subsequent revision throughout the process of sub, I ended up adding there's like a side character named Mark, and he becomes super important. Like, he joins the quest and is so critical to the story. So it's like weird to see a version without Mark in it, because I love Mark. She's an elemental, a human with rare magic running through her veins. There's like a lot more, again, there's a lot more to that concept of elementals. They're basically these like created beings that have magic stuffed into them against their will, that get reincarnated. But it's like, I don't need to get into that here. All I need to know is that Ari is this thing. She has this magic and it's very destructive, and Ryan knows stuff about her that she doesn't. I also feel like I should mention that this character Ryan is like 30 to 40. Like, he's a mentor figure, and I feel like I could have conveyed that better. I remember pitching this book a couple times and people thought it was a Ryan Ari romance, which is like, no, I'll never do that. Maybe I could mention that he becomes a mentor to her in some way. But anyway, next paragraph. Ari, guilt-ridden aside, I think that's a little bit repetitive. Ari eagerly takes on the task, or something would be fine, but here's what it says. Ari, guilt-ridden, takes on the task, and she and a reluctant Ryan set off across the desert in his rundown Winnebago. In the Mojave, a pair of fortune-telling demons trade some of Ari's magic for the Revenant Flower. A friendly bartender also points Ari in the direction of a nearby ghost town, where she'll be able to find a Hellfire Blade, although not without an ominous warning. Before she and Ryan can leave, Alec attacks again, revealing during the fight that he intends to exchange Ari for his sister. The newfound travel companions manage to defeat Alec and carry on. This one's interesting because I feel like there's information missing, although my memory is kind of spotty as to what things were present in the first version that I queried and what things happened in like later revisions. It's kind of a southwestern deserty gothic kind of setting. They go to ghost towns, they go to this like isolated watering hole in the middle of nowhere populated with demons, and I think there's like a chupacabra there. I do think this gets a little bit too lost in the weeds. There's like a lot of world building things that come up for the first time here. For example, I guess we do mention the Demon King, but like the presence of demons just in the real world. And then, you know, it's vague. What is the ominous warning that the bartender gives her? Yeah, a little bit of repetition here too. I think just like the first line being Ari takes on the task. But in one fell swoop, we have 2 of the items collected. They defeat Alec in a little scuffle. I think I should also mention that Alec's sister is dead. He's trying to basically trade Ari for his sister's soul. And a clarity thing, next paragraph is going to start and they just reached the ghost town there. So I think I would want to say, as Ari and Ryan are leaving the bar, why was there a bar in this book? It's a young adult novel. What, I should say like a diner or something. Anyway, as they're leaving the diner/bar is when Alec attacks and they beat him because there's like a bunch of people there and it becomes like a little like saloon brawl. I thought that was kind of cute. Next paragraph. They reach the ghost town, which is overrun by hungry spirits and talking crows. Matters are further complicated when Alec tracks them down once again, only to be just as overwhelmed by the town as they are. Ari, Ryan, and Alec are confronted by their respective pasts and are almost trapped in the ghost town for good, but with a little bit of teamwork, they're able to escape with the Hellfire Blade. However, Alec is still untrustworthy, so Ari and Ryan take him hostage and stop at a motel to rest and question their captive. That is so ridiculous. Sorry, I'm like flashing back to this. Alec is like one of my favorite characters I've ever written, so this is really funny to me that it goes this route. The rest of it does feel a little bit vague. They're overwhelmed by the town. By what? By the spirits or the crows or something else? They're confronted by their respective pasts. I think we should show that this is the part where Ari learns a little bit more about Alec and starts to feel a little sympathy for him. They're almost trapped in the ghost town for good. Again, by what? A little bit of teamwork. Again, what do they do? Alec is still untrustworthy. Why? Before Ari can get anything substantial out of Alec, another threat arrives in the form of a hunter, someone who specializes in tracking down powerful magical beings. He too has been hired to catch Ari, but she and Alec manage to fight him off. Alec escapes in the process, but not before he gives Ari the location of the final item she seeks. Ari also discovers that the Demon King was the one who hired Alec and the hunter to come after her, but she doesn't know why. See, this is the part where I'm like, okay, this book wasn't very strongly structured, so the synopsis feels less strong as a result. This is like a beat-by-beat summary, like we haven't skipped any beats so far, which is absolutely wild. So we did mention the Demon King before, and it's because Finn's mom wants to make a deal with him to get the soul back of Finn or bring him back to life or whatever. I would say instead of before Ari can get anything substantial out of Alec, well, maybe you can say that, but I would just like trim down the hunter part and be like someone else comes after them because Alec didn't do his job. He was hired to capture Ari, he failed twice, 3 times at this point. So 3 strikes, he's out, something like that. And then we have the cute little moment where Ari and Alec fight him off together. Final item she seeks is Phoenix Bones, so we know that already. Alec tells Ari where the Phoenix Bones are. Ari also discovers that the Demon King was the one who hired Alec and the hunter to come after her, but what she doesn't know is why. Maybe that's fine. I feel like there's some ways to kind of reintegrate that into the main body of this paragraph to make it flow a little more smoothly. You know, so far, this is what happens in the plot, so whatever. This is kind of like the midpoint. Things have changed for Ari, they've changed for Alec. Their relationship is no longer the same because they've worked together twice now and she knows stuff about him and she can't see him as fully an enemy anymore. The Phoenix Bones are in the possession of an eccentric Arizona-based sorcerer. Sorry, I've been watching What We Do in the Shadows. As it turns out, Ryan and the sorcerer are old frenemies. I don't like the use of that word. But the sorcerer takes a shine to Ari and agrees to give her the Phoenix Bones in exchange for a favor. Ari helps her catch a giant fire-breathing lizard and gets the bones, but before she and Ryan can leave, a desperate and furious Alec shows up. Another thing I'm noticing here is that we're focusing on like the emotions in the moment, so we say that Alec is desperate and furious, we say that Ari is grief-stricken, but we don't really get into the underlying motivation. We know that he wants his sister back. I think we could get more into that in the synopsis to give those emotions more weight, if that makes sense. Again, this could just be a single line. The other thing here is that, yes, this was like kind of a side quest filler chapter, which why did I need filler in a book that was 50,000 words long? And I think this is another example of an instance in which I could have focused on maybe the more interesting or resonant or unique parts of this section of the book rather than like the little side quests that Ari goes on. Because this is, I remember this chapter or section of chapters, this kind of like moment. This was kind of the part where Ari learns a lot more about magic and a lot more about her place in this magical world that previously she knew nothing about. This is like one of those Percy Jackson kind of like kid finds out they have magic after being normal for most of their life. Instead of focusing on the giant fire-breathing lizard side quest, this could be an opportunity to kind of dive into that and talk about how her relationship with this new sorcerer woman is kind of like giving her this education that she so desperately needs at this point, rather than, again, focusing on the external. So it's a balance of like, here's what they're doing externally, but also, is the internal part more important in this section, or is the information part more important in this section? I guess that's all I have to say about that. In the ensuing scuffle, Alec kills Ryan's sorcerer friend. Ari cracks and loses control of her magic, and in her rage, nearly being consumed by the flames before Ryan risks his life to sedate her. That sounds really wrong, but okay. While unconscious, Ari has visions of a fire goddess who gives her glimpses of Alec's past. Oh, interesting. Originally, it's in the ghost town that you get Alec's past. Or no, from what I remember, it's the ghost town that you see Alec's past, but this is interesting. She learns that Ryan raised and then subsequently betrayed Alec when he was a child. In her dreams, she is also visited by the Demon King, who claims to have been keeping an eye on her, although his motivations are still annoyingly opaque. So this is 2 dream sequences back to back. I think the Demon King one is more important. I'm being influenced too much by like my memory of the revised version, which was so different from this, so I'm like really confused by myself and my past choices. Yeah, a lot of fat to trim here. I would basically just cut everything about Ryan and Alec's backstory. I don't think that's terribly important to your understanding of the synopsis. What I'm noticing in general here throughout the synopsis is it touches on a lot of the beats that happen, but they do feel disjointed because you don't have the same context. Your goal in a synopsis is to kind of tell that coherent story of like, here's what happens, and then as a result this happens and this happens, as opposed to just like laying out flat beats, which I think is what a lot of synopsis writing advice is. You still want to see some connective tissue there, you still want things to make sense, and in that I think this synopsis could be a lot stronger in that regard. Ari, upset, sends Ryan away and delivers the 3 magical items to Farah. Ooh, I didn't name her. I can't believe I submitted this to agents and they maybe agents don't read synopses. Maybe it's okay. Farah is Finn's mom. So Farah is the witch who's trying to bring her son back from the dead and who sent them on this quest. Who sent a teenager on this quest with a man that she's never met before. Farah summons the Demon King, but he refuses to cooperate, insisting on making a deal with Ari instead. He demands a lifetime of servitude in exchange for Finn. As a twisted gesture of goodwill, he offers up a battered Alec, giving Ari an opportunity to extract revenge. She can't bring herself to hurt him, but she agrees to work for the Demon King in order to bring Finn back and right her wrongs. Ryan turns up and attempts to stop the Demon King before the deal can be made, but he fails. The Demon King kills him for his troubles, and Ari realizes she would have to become a killer under his service, something Finn would never want for her. That's a lot of information. That's like too much information. Some of it is also worded very weirdly. He offers her like a contract basically to work for him for money, like protection and stuff, because what she is very hunted by a lot of different kinds of groups in this magical society that exists, and also offers her training. So it's like an exchange to work for him. It's not servitude, but yeah, she would have to do whatever he says. And the Demon King does kill Ryan, which is very funny that I read that so quickly I didn't process that. But overall, I think this is like okay. You get this kind of like everything kind of goes to crap in this moment. Like Farah tries to do her summoning and it doesn't work because the Demon King doesn't want anything from her, so he tries to make a deal with Ari, and she's like, oh, I really want Finn back, but I don't think this is a good idea. And Farah is manipulating her in this moment to accept because she wants Finn back and she doesn't care about Ari. Why am I describing what's happening? But that's kind of what's going on in this. I think this conveys that relatively well. It conveys the conflict that Ari is faced with. I think here the issue is that there's so many threads to keep track of throughout the rest of the synopsis, like that Ari and Ryan parted ways. Alec like disappeared after murdering someone and is apparently now the Demon King's hostage. I think the way that it ends with that, this paragraph ends with that beat about Ari's decision, it works for me. I'm not mad at this. I would definitely rewrite it to be more succinct and more clear, but I think overall it does its job, and this is the second to last paragraph. So this is the climax. Like, this is where everything kind of happens. You do want to end your synopsis basically on the climax. I have another short paragraph that I'm about to read that's kind of what her decision is, how it culminates, everything, how everything wraps up. In terms of the general pacing of the synopsis and where all the beats fall in the synopsis itself, I think that works pretty well. Ari calls upon her magic one last time, resolving to burn herself along with the Demon King in order to prevent further suffering. However, Alec manages to fatally wound the demon before it's too late for her. Farah and the Demon King disappear, and Ryan wakes up, miraculously uninjured. Ari lets Alec go, and she and Ryan are left to pick up the pieces of their lives and figure out what to do next. After reuniting with her family, Ari and Ryan visit Finn's grave and begin the long process of moving on. Crazy that I gloss over Ryan coming back to life. He does that because he's not a human being, and you find out that he's actually like hundreds of years old and just looks like a normal person, but he's not a normal person. He's a weirdo. This is, as you can see, kind of the wrap-up denouement. That last beat where Ari and Ryan and eventually Mark and also Alec, actually, in the last draft, that's a long story, I won't get into it. They become like a little found family, even though Ari has a real family that she likes. But they all go to Finn's grave together to like pay their respects and also talk about who he was as a person and all this stuff. And that's the last beat of the story, that's the final image. It's also the last beat of this synopsis. And the synopsis kind of says what is unsaid in the final beat of the book. So in the final beat of the book, you don't have this kind of like, oh, we're moving on. There's not like a clear-cut statement in the text that says that. It's not told to you, it's more shown, but in the synopsis that is told to you. So in general, that's another thing to notice in synopses, is that you're able to tell. You're not necessarily relegated to having to imply or show or include in subtext a lot of those emotional beats. And that's part of the reason why there is a lot of emotion written out in the synopsis, but again, I would probably like to see like a little bit less of that. So that was a synopsis for ARI'S Guide. It was okay. Again, I think like the structure of it is perfectly serviceable. It's just extremely weird to see this version of the story written out as opposed to like my version of the story that I really liked after several revisions. But it did the job, it got me an agent. Now let's talk about what some of our takeaways should be from looking at the synopsis and what we are looking for in synopses in general. So again, you're going to notice how the plot beats are presented in a very straightforward manner. There's not a lot of voice in the synopsis. This is a play-by-play. Again, you do want to see some connective tissue there, but it is still just like surface level beats, a little bit of what's going on internally and what motivations are happening in the moment. What you just read through in that synopsis were the major scenes in ARI'S Guide. There were a lot of like smaller scenes scattered between. There's a lot of conversations that happen between the various characters that were included here. There's like little pit stops on the way also because it's a road trip book. And I just kind of included the beats where conflict happens and where Ari's journey is pushed forward in some meaningful way. And of course, condensing your entire book to 1 to 2 pages of summary is far easier said than done, but focusing on those main beats, focusing on those moments of conflict and your main character's journey are going to be the best way to trim down like 80,000, or in my case 50,000, 80,000 to 100,000 plus words into 1 to 2 pages. I've also found that there are 3 basic techniques to start kind of condensing once you have a finished book if you're approaching a synopsis from that direction. So 3 ways to break your book down. 1, go act by act. You don't have to structure it as a synopsis right away, but if you just write like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and the basic outline of what happens in each act and how that pushes the story forward within each act. Another one is chapter by chapter and then condense. So writing literally like a sentence or 2 for each chapter and then condensing to only focus on the main beats, expanding upon those main beats. Another way is to start with conflict and unroll. I think that's kind of what I went for with this synopsis, is that I started with that opening conflict and I tried to focus on the beats that were directly related to that main conflict, which in this was kind of like Ari versus Alec, but also Ari versus the person behind Alec, who was the Demon King. So you could do conflict or goal or even motivation, whichever one makes the most sense for your story. And because I like to write my synopsis before I have a full draft or even a full outline, I typically go with like start with conflict or goal and unroll, but the first 2 are going to work really well if you have a finished manuscript, if you've been staring at it, wondering like, how am I going to write a synopsis for this thing? I think those 2 methods are a really good way to break that down into something that's at least more manageable to turn into a synopsis, if not like an early version of your finished synopsis. Let's wrap this up with some overall tips for writing a synopsis. Number 1, keep your voice out of it. Don't get too voicey, don't get fancy, no purple prose. Keep it flat, keep it monotone. This is like just a functional summary. Number 2, consider the big picture of the story. Focus on the big beats that relate directly to the conflict or the goal, or, you know, focus on the main story beats and not the nitty-gritty details. You do also want to include some of that like character conflict in there, that internal conflict, but overall you're going to be focusing on those big external beats. I sometimes think of them as set pieces, like the restaurant, a set piece. The bar fight, a set piece. The sorcerer's house, a set piece. Number 3, only mention world building that is directly related to what you're saying in your synopsis. So not directly related to what's happening in the book, but anything that needs to be understood for the synopsis to make sense is what you should include. And even then, you want to be really, really minimalistic with the world building details that you include in a synopsis. In this, I never really dive into what elementals are. I don't really dive into what the Demon King is. I probably could have mentioned that he has the power to bring the dead back to life. I guess it's sort of implied, but maybe it's not enough. You just need to know that Ari has fire powers. You just need to know that the Demon King is powerful, basically. And number 4, have at least a few people look over the synopsis, preferably people who haven't read your full manuscript, and also some who have, so you have like both sides. And I want you to ask them primarily that the flow of events in the synopsis makes sense. Like they can keep up with what's happening based off of what you've included. If they can't do that, have them pinpoint some areas where they get confused or where they feel like information is missing, and then expand upon those moments. And yeah, that is pretty much it. I hope you found this helpful. If you got all the way to the end of this video, feel free to drop a little pencil emoji or something similar. I don't know. I guess a pencil emoji. I'll commit to that. If you have any synopsis writing resources that you like or found helpful, drop them in the comments below. I'll make a list of these resources with links in the description box so that people can reference them, because I think having multiple streams of information is very important. I would not want anyone to write a synopsis based off of this video alone. Nonetheless, I hope it's helpful to see another example of a synopsis. I will actually put the synopsis that is for ARI'S guide up on my blog so that you can look at a written version as well, and I'll include the link to that below. But that's not going to have any commentary other than like the disclaimer that it's a very old synopsis. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you as always for watching and for supporting. If you want to see more about my publishing journey or hear more discussions about publishing and writing, you can go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Bye.